Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 6th Annual ChicagoCHEC Virtual Community Forum. Our theme this year is Working Together for Better, New Beginnings and New Normal in the Cancer Support and Survivorship Community. Before we get started, we're just going to go over a few Zoom features that you might find helpful.
Thank you, Selena. So just to remind everyone, in case there are people on this call who were not on yesterday, if you take a look at these arrows, you'll see that the green arrow is pointing to the mute button, the blue arrow to the chat, the yellow to raise your hand, the red to the Q&A, and the white to the interpretation. Antes de comenzar, queríamos recordarles de algunas de las funciones de Zoom. Si mira las flechas, puede ver que la flecha verde está apuntando al botón de silencio o el mute, la flecha azul al chat, la flecha amarilla donde puede alzar su mano si tiene alguna pregunta o un comentario, la flecha roja donde puede enviar sus preguntas y la flecha blanca para cambiar el idioma. Si le gustaría escuchar el evento en español, por favor seleccione Spanish, donde apunta la flecha blanca. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Melissa. A few ground rules. Just please note you have been muted upon entering this event. We will unmute the audience during the Q&A portions of our forum. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to submit them by either posting them in the Q&A box or by using the raise your hand feature. A quick notice to attendees. Please note that this event is being digitally recorded and or photographed, and by attending, you do acknowledge and agree to grant ChicagoCHEC the right to do that. All right, so I will be your moderator today. My name is Selena Roque. I was a ChicagoCHEC Fellow and LEAP participant last year, and currently I am a registered nurse at Mayo Clinic in the Hematology and Oncology specialty. I am so excited to be back with the ChicagoCHEC family today, so thank you so much for having me. At this time, I would like to invite Dr. Kareem Watson for opening remarks.
Thank you so much. And first of all, Selena, I have to say again, congratulations. You truly represent the fact that you're in the cancer space, working in nursing. You truly represent. I think that we could start and close with that, because if we want to say, what does ChicagoCHEC represent? It's absolutely that. So I'll just be brief with you all today. If you want to put it in, there we go. So just want to talk to you briefly today, just to kind of shape a little bit about what the ChicagoCHEC program has meant for me, both as a researcher, a former early stage investigator, but then also how some best practices that we've learned in the ChicagoCHEC program has actually helped us address the cancer disparities that continue to exist throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, but then also offer some ways that how through community engagement, we've been able to combat a lot of that. Next slide. So I just want to discuss the impact of COVID and what it's had on the communities and how it's impacted our cancer screening. Then describe the way ChicagoCHEC has leveraged its engagement best practices to address cancer disparities. And then just briefly discuss my new role in the All of Us research program and some of the ways that All of Us has been addressing cancer disparities, and then leave us with a call to action. So just briefly, we know this, and I'm sure over the past couple of days you all have heard this, but 67% of adults between 50 and 75 are up to date for colorectal cancer screening. That sounds great, but that means that 33% of adults are not up to date for colorectal cancer screening. And so what we unfortunately know that that's going to mean is that there's going to be a backlog of community members that are seeking out ways to get screened for colorectal cancer. And we also understand that that may lead to other delayed wait times, and with delayed wait times, sometimes that can impact community trust, and also sometimes someone's willingness to continue on to get screened. Because it's a big decision to say, I'm going to go get screened. And if you make that decision only to find out that there's delayed wait, or not even screening is not even available, or that the system is so backlogged and taking care of those that may be at high risk, you can see how that can impact someone's ability to actually be compliant and move forward with the screening. And if we think about in our community health centers, in our federally qualified health centers and community health centers, which we call FQHCs, only 44% of that population is actually up to date with colorectal cancer screening. And if we think about African-American populations who carry a higher rate of disease and sickness, which we call morbidity, and even death, which we sometimes label as mortality, we're seeing even greater inequities and disparities in screening and diagnosis since the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the things is that the Center for Medicaid Services, CMS, has recommended at one point a limitation on non-urgent screenings. And we understand why this had to happen, because there was many people who had urgent screenings that were delayed or slowed up because of the pandemic. And so we have to make sure that those cases are happening. And lung cancer screening via low-dose CT were suspended in some cases for non-urgent screening. As a result of that, what we're seeing is greater malignancies, cancers in those who return for follow-up screening. Next slide. So what is that's kind of some of the landscape of what has happened. What's some of the landscape of some of the ways that ChicagoCHEC has actually been part of the solution? Because we never want to present to you just formally the problem. We want to present to you some of the solutions. And I'm so happy to see on the call today one of the collaborators that I've worked with so closely, and it's Dr. Joseph Ben-Levy from Northeastern Illinois University. And I'll just briefly describe to you how ChicagoCHEC, and particularly the SHARE program, supporting high-risk African-American men in research and engagement in decision-making for lung cancer screening, is what we hope an example of a best practice in how we can engage community members. Next. So over the summer, we had the privilege of doing virtual engagement with 8 African-American men that were identified as what we call citizen scientists. So this is a multi-team effort that was developed with the brain trust of Marcus Murray from Project Brotherhood. And as a result of Marcus's social network and the decades, over 2 decades of health disparities that have been addressed by Marcus and Project Brotherhood, we've been able to leverage a community of scientists that we call citizen scientists. These citizen scientists have been able to increase the reach of people that we otherwise would not been able to reach. So if you think about it, if we're able to reach one barber and train and engage that barber has a clientele of over 100 people. So hopefully he's able to take the information that he learns and spread that out. And then when we think about the reach of gems and those hidden figures and those treasures like the Dr. Ben-Levy's of the world, Dr. Ben-Levy's has his own following of alumni. And when you take Dr. Ben-Levy's class, you don't just take a class on whatever he's teaching. You also take a class, then you get immersed into everything that he learns. So he brings you on this journey with him. And so having Dr. Ben-Levy at the table with us also allows him to engage his former students. And because NEIU does an amazing job of creating spaces and places for those students that may be quote unquote non-traditional, we often find ourselves with engaging Dr. Ben-Levy's students as citizen scientists who also may be at risk for some of the cancers that we're talking about. And even more important, some of them have actually been cancer survivors themselves. So what we've been able to do over the summer is engage a group of citizen scientists to address the disparities and to hear directly from community members about how can we leverage the multi-team that we have led by Dr. Phoenix Matthews from the UIC College of Nursing, Dr. David Odell from Northeastern, and Dr. Ben-Levy from NEIU, and Marcus Murray from Project Brotherhood, and others like Kurt Eskridge, one of our barbers. How can we leverage that community brain trust to address and to be a resource for some of those communities that are being impacted by COVID-19 for cancer screening? Next slide. So in my new role, one of the things that I'm part of now is the NIH All of Us research program. And the All of Us study is a study that many of the collaborators in the ChicagoCHEC program are a part of. Several of the leadership in ChicagoCHEC are actually co-investigators on the All of Us study. And the All of Us research program is a historic effort for us to gather 1 million or more people in the United States to think about how we think about research differently and to take into account where people live, socioeconomic, their biology, our genes, what we're born with, and to think about precision screening and precision medicine in a way that really is inclusive of all of us. And even the ChicagoCHEC program at the early onset of All of Us was able to show community members through our former community forum actually how they could be a part of the All of Us mobile experience. Next slide. And the kind of questions that the resources that we hope to answer through ChicagoCHEC, through all of us, I'm always going to be a part of ChicagoCHEC family, is how may we prevent the chronic pain that affects more than 100 million people across the US. Those are types of questions we hope to answer, or develop pain medicine that potentially may not be addictive. And so if you think about that particular question, but the research that we'll be developing through the All of Us research program can hopefully allow us to address what many of us are seeing right here in Chicago in the opioid epidemic and what many of our community members are having. We also are hopefully going to be able to develop better treatment for diabetics, which can affect almost 10% of Americans and even potentially prevent diabetes altogether. But we also think about how can we slow even things like dementia, and how can we help researchers think about cancer cures that will work the first time so we can skip those many painful treatments and errors in chemotherapies that we currently see. Because if we had data and understood how the lives of cancer survivors, how it's impacted by not only the chemotherapies that they live, but their family history, the geography, where they get their treatment, and the types of treatments that they get, we could eliminate a lot of the errors that we see in a lot of our cancer survivors. So that's what we hope to do through the All of Us research program, and some questions that we hope to answer. But I just want to end with the fact that, as I talked about Selena and the fact that ChicagoCHEC has directly poured into her career and allowed her to step into this amazing role in oncology nursing. It's also, I'm a product of ChicagoCHEC as well. And ChicagoCHEC has allowed me to take the community engagement skills that I gained and learned alongside many of you and learn from many of you to now have a national footprint through the NIH effort to really take the Chicago model of community engagement national. So I want to thank you all so much. And I hope that the call to action I have for you is similar to what we ask for our citizen scientists. We use the concept of social network theory. And that social network theory is really rooted in each one, reach one. So my call to action to you is, what can you do to ensure that if you meet anyone that has been impacted by cancer screening, whether they've been held up, whether they have transportation issues, how can you reach out to your network, meaning your ChicagoCHEC network, to say, we can get you resources through the American Cancer Society. We can get you resources through community health centers to make sure that transportation is not an issue for you getting the screening. We can make sure that you understand that if you are uninsured or underinsured, that community health centers are a place for you where you can get care despite your ability to pay. We can be a resource for you for that. We can also be a resource to let you know that as you think about questions around the COVID-19 vaccine, around testing and screening, if you are a cancer survivor and have questions, we can connect you to cancer survivorship programs that's run through the UI Health Mile Square Health Center with Dr. Pamela Ganshaw, where she's thinking and asking innovative questions, not just about your cancer survivorship, but about your family history. Do we have a true picture of your family history, both the genes that you've inherited, but also how the environment in which you live in can impact your cancer risk? Our call to action is to make sure that you utilize and know that ChicagoCHEC is a reference for you, for both your being a cancer advocate, but also to make sure that our communities have access to screening, treatment, and survivorship support. So I want to thank you all so much. I look forward to continuing to be engaged with our ChicagoCHEC family, and I look forward to you all learning more and more about the All of Us research program and how it can partner with the ChicagoCHEC program in the future. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Watson. I am so inspired every time one of you talks. Thank you so much. Truly, the impact that ChicagoCHEC has and the ripple effect that they have on people across this country, it's unbelievable. So again, thank you so much. At this time, we would like to move into our first session. It is cancer screening and healthier outcomes, and we would like to invite Dr. Pamela Ganshaw to present. Whenever you're ready, Dr. Ganshaw.
Thank you so much. I'm going to just take a second here to share my screen, make sure everybody can see that. No, I don't want you to see that. Second, let me try once more. Well,
It looks good on our end.
Oh, it does. Okay, are you seeing my, let's see, here we go. Are you seeing the title of my talk being cancer screening and prevention?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. I've got 3 screens, so apologies for the confusion. And thank you, Dr. Watson, for really all of the amazing work that you're going to do and that you have done, and the amazing work that CHEC has done. Yeah, I'm really excited to be at the University of Illinois right now. I came in March. I'm an internist by trade and an onco generalist. And as Dr. Watson mentioned, I have been doing a lot of work on sort of both the upstream and the downstream side of cancer, taking care and really working to make strides in cancer prevention and cancer screening, including cancer genetics, and also in the cancer survivorship space. Most of my work for the last 24 years has been at Cook County Health, and I was very excited to join the Cancer Center at UI Health here in March, where I am going to I hope to build a lot of programs around cancer prevention and cancer genetics, and thinking about the importance of family history and really using that to individualize our cancer screening recommendations for cancer survivors and for those without cancer. But what I've been charged with today, and what I'm really excited to talk to you guys today, is just to kind of review the cancer screening and prevention recommendations that are out there. I think we've all been living in a bubble with COVID for the last 2 years. And I'm interested to know how that bubble has affected your own cancer screening efforts, as well as those of all of the people that you touch through the different community programs. And so I wanted to start today with an audience poll, and I'd like you to put your answer in the chat if you want to me, or you can answer, or you can put your answer in there to everybody, or just even think about what your answer is, because I think it's really important. We're taking care of everybody else, but we also need to take care of ourselves. And so I just want you to think about and answer the question: what is your cancer screening? Are you up to date with all of your cancer screenings? If you are, and all your cancer screenings done, great, put an A in the chat. If you're behind and you need to see your doctor, a B, and if you're not sure, put a C. Good, I see lots of stuff coming in, lots of A's, some B's, some C's. And so what I hope to do today with this lecture, if your answer is A, I'm gonna charge you with some action items. I'd like you to then really focus on sharing your experiences with cancer screening and cancer prevention, and sharing those experiences with others around you, with those individuals you touch who may not be well screened. If it's B, I hope that you'll do what the people who answered A are doing, and think about getting yourself screened, because in order for you to help everybody out there, we need to keep you healthy. And if your answer is C, I'm hoping that what I can do today is just review all of these recommendations. We've been living in that bubble. We've been thinking about COVID, and now, we need to continue to think about that, but we also need to think about what those cancer screening recommendations are, how they apply to you, maybe what habits you've changed that might be putting you at higher risk for cancer, and think about how to change those. And so I'm hoping that this talk today will speak to all of you, no matter what your cancer screening status is, to both improve your lives and those around you. And so, sorry, let's see if I can advance my slide. 1 second. There we go. Okay, sorry, I've got 3 screens running here. So, and so, I'm going to talk today about getting back to regular and healthy routines. And what I'm going to do is review some of the updated recommendations for cancer screening, but I'm going to really cover all the recommendations. So I'm going to talk about colon cancer screening and lung cancer screening. Those are the 2 that have been updated most recently. And while many of us have been thinking about COVID, we need to understand what those changes what those updates have occurred since we've been sort of living in our bubble. I'm also going to talk about cervical cancer screening. I think it's one of our best tests out there, as well as cover breast and prostate cancer. I'll also touch briefly on racial disparities in cancer outcomes. I know everybody in this room is well aware of these, and I'll talk briefly about these. I think that's a lecture in itself, so I won't probably do it all of the justice that we need to, but I think it's important to recognize that there are cancer disparities out there, racial disparities in cancer outcomes, and how those are being addressed right now. I'll also, as Dr. Watson mentioned, talk about ways to personalize your cancer screening routines. And this is really going to be based on risk factors. So I'll review some of the risk factors, such as smoking that might impact your, your need to undergo lung cancer screening, but also family history. And so I really want us, from one of the takeaways from the talk today is that we need to start to get to know our family history, because the cancer screening guidelines that are out there are for average risk individuals. And while you might not be at increased risk for lots of different cancers, you may, based on your family history, be at increased risk for one or more cancers and maybe need to have genetic testing. And so we'll touch on that briefly as well. And then I am going to review some of the cancer prevention options that are out there. And I know there's a long list of these, but there's a lot of lifestyle factors that we have that if we change them, we can reduce our risk for cancer. And so I want us to start thinking about those again. We're not just out there trying to prevent COVID, but we also want to prevent cancer. And so I'm hoping that through my talk today, we can get through all of those. But I'd like to start with some messages from our cancer survivorship and our cancer survivor panel yesterday. That was one of the most richest discussions I've heard in a long time. I really enjoyed being part of that. And I want to thank all of the cancer survivors who are part of that. What I've tried to do here is just to outline some of the messages I heard from our cancer survivors around cancer screening and prevention, and around just, things that we can do and we can help others do to help in the fight for cancer and to help prevent cancer and detect it early. And I think one of them is, and one of the big messages I heard early on in that discussion yesterday, was if something feels wrong about your body, if something about your body feels wrong, get it checked out. Okay, get it checked out sooner rather than later, because the earlier that we can find a cancer, if that happens to be what's wrong with your body, the easier it is to treat. And then, as I mentioned earlier, make a promise to yourself to get checked out regularly and routinely. And actually, one of the call to actions I'm going to have at the end of this is to ask you to commit to something. And so stay tuned for the activity at the end, but I am going to ask you to think about what you can do differently, just a little step that can make a difference for you in your life. And then I'll also ask you to share your experiences with others. So this is, again, another big message that I heard on that cancer survivor panel yesterday was just even sharing it among themselves, their stories impacted, they talked about the impact that sharing stories had on getting curious about, well, is my treatment the same as your treatment? Maybe it should be. Why are there differences? Or sharing a positive experience about cancer screening, but sharing those experiences and those stories are really, really important. Starting that conversation can help others take those next steps with you. And then again, and I'm a little biased here because this is, one of my passions is getting cancer genetics and identifying hereditary cancer syndromes and getting to know that family history and thinking about how that personalizes your own cancer screening recommendations is so important. So in addition to starting the conversations with others, also start them with your families and make an effort to get to know your family history and share that with your doctor. So what I want to do to kind of start the lecture today, after sharing all of these messages, is just to kind of reflect back on the burden of cancer in the US and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on that burden. And I know this is going to be covered in a subsequent lecture, and Dr. Watson talked briefly about this just a few minutes ago, but I've got a couple figures here just to kind of remind us about the overall burden of cancer in the US in terms of how many cases are diagnosed or are estimated to be diagnosed into 2020, and how those are going to increase by 2040. And I think importantly, it's also, important to understand the mortality. So while we're going to treat a lot of those cancers and many people are not going to die from those cancers, there still is a high mortality from cancer. And this is probably going to be worsened by COVID-19. A lot of people have delayed their care, and clinics have closed down or just focused completely on COVID. Mammo centers closed down for a while too, and many of our screening tests weren't available. Those have opened up now, and getting those screening tests at many centers is safe now, but we need to understand the impact of this on the diagnosis of cancer. We've missed a lot of cancers, and those cancers are going to be diagnosed at later stages, which means they are going to be harder to treat, and they may lead to higher mortality rates. And so I think it's really incumbent upon all of us that are, out there doing this work in cancer to get out there and to get people back in for screening and to make sure they know if they have symptoms to get those evaluated promptly. So, I want to just remind us again that the goal of cancer screening is to catch it early. And this may take some work. And that's what I sort of hope to show with this GIF or GIF. But remember that the goal of cancer screening doesn't always prevent cancer, but the goal is to catch it early, and that's going to take some extra work. It may take some extra tests, and it may not always be easy, but if you stick with it, you will find that it's worthwhile and worth your successful efforts. Remember that cancer, if detected early, is much more treatable when it's found at an early stage. So I'm going to move into the different cancer screening recommendations now, and I'd like to start with colorectal cancer screening. One of the reasons I want to start with that is because, you know, this is a cancer that affects both men and women. I know breast cancer gets a lot of attention, and prostate, they're sort of gender specific, but I think colon cancer often gets left out of that discussion. And this is important as it affects both men and women. And luckily, you know, my job is a little easier today because most of the organizations actually agree upon the recommendations for colorectal cancer screening. And these have changed recently since we've all been in our bubble with COVID. 45 is now the new 50. And so colorectal cancer screening now should start in your 40s. Really at age 45, if you have a family history, it may need to start sooner, but should continue on into your mid 70s and then be something that you discuss with your doctor. So it may be that colorectal cancer screening should continue into your mid 80s. After about age 85, there's probably not a lot of benefit. And because some of these tests are really invasive and may not really save lives, we recommend that colorectal cancer screening and many cancer screenings really drop off in mid 70s to mid 80s, and that those conversations about whether those should continue should really be made with your doctor, taking into consideration other illnesses that you may have and your individual preferences. So we've got an age change for colorectal cancer. We now start at 45 instead of 50. The other great thing about colorectal cancer is we have test options. So unlike many of our other cancer screening tests, we have options. So you can have a visual exam or a colorectal, like a colonoscopy or a flexible sigmoidoscopy, or you can do a home stool-based test. And so there's lots of options here. And if you're still uncomfortable going to the clinics and the health centers and the hospitals because of COVID, consider doing a home-based test. I think the thing to remember as it relates to routine colorectal cancer screening is that 45 is the new 50 and you've got options. So those options will determine the interval and the frequency at which you should have the test. So if you have a visual examination like a colonoscopy or flexible sigmoidoscopy, these need to be done every 5 to 10 years. So the intervals can be stretched out compared with the stool-based tests, which need to be done every 1 to 3 years. And so, you know, what is the right test for you? If you're at average risk for colon cancer, if it doesn't run in your family, if you don't have a history of polyps, you can really consider either of these tests and take into account the interval and the frequency which they need to be done, but also the preparation and where those tests are done. So, you know, if you have a colonoscopy or flexible sigmoidoscopy, you may need to have a bowel prep, and you may not find that fun. Maybe that was a really uncomfortable experience. And so instead you want to stick with those stool-based tests and just go to a colonoscopy if there's an abnormality on your test. And my slide's not changing. Okay, there we go. The second cancer screening recommendation that I want to cover is lung cancer screening recommendations. Again, these affect both men and women, but they don't affect everyone. So these are really reserved for people who either have a history of smoking or are current smokers. And these guidelines have also changed since we've been in our bubble during COVID. And so I've listed on the right here in the lung, the new cancer screening recommendations. And again, they're pretty consistent across most of the different guidelines. So, you know, I know that it can be confusing when guidelines are different, but both for colorectal cancer screening and for lung cancer screening, they're pretty consistent. So if you're a current or a former smoker who quit in the last 15 years, and you're between the ages of 50 to 80 years old, and you have at least a 20-pack year history of smoking or more, you really want to talk with your doctor about having a CT scan of your lungs done every year to check and to identify an early stage lung cancer. You also, if you're a current smoker, should think about stopping smoking. And I'll get to that when we talk about cancer prevention. But I think the things to remember for lung cancer screening are 50 and 20. So on your 50th birthday, ask yourself those questions. You know, has it been more than 15 years since I've stopped smoking? If not, you know, and you have a pack year, over 20 pack year history of smoking, you should talk with your doctor about having a lung cancer screening test every year. Some people ask, how should I calculate my pack year history of smoking? It's really pretty simple. So how many packs have you smoked on average? Okay, and I know that that can change over time, but if you want to even take your highest amount. So I was smoking a pack a year for 10 years, and then maybe I cut it down to a half a pack a year, but take that one pack and multiply it times the number of years since that you smoked. If you took little breaks, you know, you really want to get down to the detail, you can subtract all of that. But really, if you started when you were 15 and now you're 55 and you're still smoking, you've been smoking intermittently for 40 years and you smoked about a pack a day, you know, that's a pretty significant, that's a 40 pack year history of smoking. And I think that you can really benefit from getting a lung cancer screening test every year to try to pick up lung cancer early if it's going to develop. The next cancer I want to talk about is cervical cancer screening. Cervical cancer screening is done through a pap smear and HPV testing and really needs to begin for most women in their early 20s. There's a little bit of discrepancy between guidelines as to what the exact start time is. Should it be 21 or 25? But this is something that women should be considering in their early 20s and should be doing about every 3 years until they're in their 30s. It's a pretty simple test to do, and it can be done in the doctor's office. After the age of 30, that interval can stretch to even 5 years if you do a combination of an HPV test and a pap smear. For those women who have had normal tests and still have a uterus after the age of 65 and haven't had a history of cancer or a serious abnormality on screening, they can stop their cervical cancer screening tests and discontinue those tests. And that's a discussion that they should have with their doctor. But if they've had a history of cervical cancer, or they've had a serious abnormality on a prior pap smear, or they haven't been well screened, those tests may need to continue. And so again, this is something that you can talk about with your doctor at around age 65, but this is our earliest cancer screening test and really needs to begin in the early 20s. Breast cancer screening. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. This is one of probably the most controversial guidelines, and you look in different places and you see all kinds of different recommendations. And so I could probably talk for an hour about these guidelines and how they might apply to you, but I'm going to try to simplify them here. And I think the best way to think about it, especially now that we're climbing out of COVID and a lot of people haven't gotten this test, is that at a minimum, every woman should have a mammogram at least every 2 years, starting at 50 and continuing to their 70s. Kind of like I talked about with colon cancer. You know, in your 70s, you start to have that discussion with your doctor. The tricky part of this is that there are women that may benefit from having yearly mammograms instead of every 2 years. And some women may benefit from starting in their 40s, even as early as 40, or sometimes earlier if it's running in the family. So it's important to have these discussions before the age of 50 and around the age of 40. You should be starting to have these discussions with your doctors. And then, you know, thinking about what the right interval is for you. Breast cancer survivors and women who carry mutations that put them at high risk for breast cancer should have mammograms at least yearly and consider alternative methods like MRIs in addition to mammograms. Especially for women who carry mutations or are high risk for a future breast cancer. And so a lot of this controversy has led to kind of risk-based breast cancer screening. So here's where it's really important, again, as with any cancer, but you want to know what your family history is. If breast cancer is running in your family, you may need to start at 40 or even earlier. And if you have other risk factors for breast cancer, you may also want to consider talking with your doctor about what the right age is to start and how frequently to have these tests. I've listed here some of the kind of most common risk factors and some of the biggest risk factors for breast cancer that we know of today. One is radiation. So if you have like a Hodgkin's lymphoma and you've received radiation to your chest for that or for other reasons, you may want to talk with your doctor about starting your breast cancer screening earlier and considering other types of tests. Alcohol, you know, some people call me the buzzkill at the bar, but alcohol is actually one of the biggest modifiable risk factors for breast cancer. And we'll talk a little bit about that and what is a healthy intake if you are going to drink.
Yeah, I want to know that.
Obesity is another risk factor for breast cancer. The relationship between breast cancer and weight is a little bit tricky, but we know that obesity is associated with later onset breast cancer. And so keeping a healthy weight is important for so many reasons, but also to reduce your risk for breast cancer. And then genetics, as I mentioned earlier, if breast cancer or ovarian cancer or other cancers are running in your family, find out if genetic testing is something that you should pursue, because the breast cancers that are associated with some of these hereditary cancer syndromes can start much earlier, and we recommend screening starting in the mid-20s for breast cancer. Being female is a risk factor for breast cancer, as well as increasing age. We talk a lot about early age breast cancers, but actually the highest risk for breast cancer comes when you reach your upper 60s and into your 70s. And so age is one of the biggest risk factors for breast cancer. But that's not to say men can't get breast cancer. And so, there are some of these hereditary cancer syndromes that we talk about can put men at risk for breast cancer as well. So knowing your family history is really important. And again, like I mentioned, I think that there are a lot of racial disparities in terms of cancer outcomes, and breast cancer is probably one of the most well-studied, and we've got a lot of work to do in this area. There is still a really, really big discrepancy and disparity in the outcomes for women for Black women who are diagnosed with breast cancer, even at the same stage as white women. And a lot of work to be done. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that. And again, I think this really requires, an entire hour-long lecture or more, to really kind of dig into this. But, I think that it's really complex. And as I'm going to talk about in a minute, it's also complex for Black men with prostate cancer and for their risk for prostate cancer. There are probably a combination of environmental and biological contributions that may put women and men at higher risk for more aggressive forms of cancer. And so we need to really focus on improving access to high quality preventive and screening measures, including genetic testing, and knowing that family history and individualizing those screening recommendations for people who have a history of cancer. We also need to do a better job of including minorities in clinical trials and as patient advocates to really get the word out there, to get people in for cancer screenings and to really take advantage of the opportunities to reduce their risk for cancer through some of the cancer prevention measures that I'm going to talk about. But also get them in clinical trials so that we know how some of these medications are working, whether they cause more side effects, or whether they work as well in patients of different races. It's really important to include patients in clinical trials, not only for cancer chemotherapeutic and treatment options, but also in cancer screening and prevention. We need to better understand why cancer is happening differently in different races, and what we can do to detect it early and to prevent it. So that brings me to prostate cancer. I'm going to talk a little bit about what those recommendations are. And again, this is one of these where the guidelines are kind of all over the place. And I think that they're going to change over time. But I think it's important to understand, prostate cancer in Black men takes a much harsher toll compared with other American men, including other men of color. We know now that Black men are at higher risk of getting prostate cancer and from dying from it. And we don't really know why, as I mentioned in the earlier slide, and around Black women with breast cancer, it's a very complex situation. And there's probably a variety of environmental and biologic and genetic factors that are playing a role here, as well as, system issues. Because of this, our prostate cancer screening recommendations that we've had out there for a while now, at least most recently, are really around discussing the risks and benefits of prostate cancer for men. And I think this is becoming really important for Black men to have that dialogue and to start that dialogue with their doctors, because, there is this more sort of aggressive and higher rate of death from prostate cancer. And so they may want to consider starting prostate cancer screening earlier. And I'll go through those guidelines in just a second. And I also think that we need to encourage, as Dr. Watson talked earlier, just getting Black men and women into clinical trials around cancer and other research studies related to both breast and prostate cancer. So our prostate cancer screening guidelines, you could Google this and you're going to come up with a whole lot of different guidelines. And I think that the important thing here, and keep in mind that these may change, but right now we're around discussion. So, prostate cancer, what we found out when we started screening everybody for prostate cancer was that we picked up a lot of cancers that didn't really end up ever potentially harming men, but that some of the treatments that we gave to these men actually really impaired their life. They caused impotence and incontinence and other things. They were really unhappy with it for a cancer that may not have ended up killing them. And so some of our treatments actually did more harm than than we anticipated. And so we really backed off of this and said, okay, men need to make some decisions around this. Maybe you want to know and maybe you'll observe it. Maybe you want to know and you'll make, decisions around your treatment options very carefully, considering all of this. And so right now the recommendations are to have that discussion, but they're age-based and they're risk-based. So all men over the age of 50 should really consider having a discussion about the risks and benefits of prostate cancer. And if you're at risk for prostate cancer, you may want to even start those decisions earlier. So around 45, if you have a family history of prostate cancer, or if you're a Black man, especially if it's running in your family. And if you carry one of these mutations, those conversations should even start earlier, around the age of 40. Men who carry BRCA2 mutations are at high risk for prostate cancer, especially if it's running in their family. And so they may want to consider starting screening at 40 or even earlier if that prostate cancer is happening earlier in the family. And so that brings me to my next slide and one of my passions, which is to know your family history. As I've talked about a lot today, it really impacts your cancer screening as well as genetic testing. So we need to stop the family secrets and start the discussions about cancer and other health issues that are in your family. Because knowing your family history can inform your own screening and personalize those recommendations. If you've got colon cancer happening in your family, you may want to start your colon cancer screening at 40 and use a colonoscopy instead of a stool-based card. Or if it's happening even earlier, you may want to think about having genetic testing for syndromes that can cause early age colon cancer, such as Lynch. And so these are really, really important to know. So, and while I encourage you and I call you to action to have that conversation with your family about what your family history of cancer is, and have it again. So this can change. You can talk to your sister, maybe they don't have breast cancer this year, but 2 years later they get it. So this should be an ongoing dialogue. And then it should also be one that you have with your doctor to determine whether you should have genetic testing if cancer is really running in your family or happening at an early age. The other question that we commonly get is, when should I stop cancer screening? And so I think things to consider around here are in your mid 70s, start to have that discussion. Do I need all these screening tests? Can we back off on some of this? Or I'm really healthy and I really want to do this until I'm in my mid 80s. Or maybe you have had another life-threatening illness, a heart attack, a stroke, something else that may actually impact your prognosis and that may impact your ability to undergo some of these screening and diagnostic tests or even treatment if you were diagnosed with cancer. That can impact your decision to undergo screening and a discussion that you should have with your doctor. It should take into account your individual preferences and the risks and the benefits of each screening test. And I think the important thing to remember here is just if we stop screening, it doesn't mean we aren't going to treat you. And so as you get older, think about that. Maybe you don't want to undergo all of the screenings and wait until you have a symptom and you're diagnosed with cancer, you can undergo treatment at that time. And so those are some of the things to think about when you're having that discussion with your doctor. I'm going to move into cancer prevention, and I'm just going to actually ask for a quick time check. I know we're at about 11:45, and I want to keep moving through this. So as long as I'm okay to keep going,
yeah.
Great. Okay, and I want to leave time for questions, so I'm going to move through this fairly.
So sorry, you've got about 10 minutes.
Okay. Great. I want to make sure I leave time for questions and I want to do our activity at the end. So I'm going to move through some of this pretty quickly. But I've listed here, you can see there are a lot of modifiable risk factors for cancer prevention. And I think these are things most people are aware of. And I'm going to kind of go through some of the details on what we need to be doing around each of these modifiable risk factors. But in general, when you think about cancer prevention, I think you want to understand that there are vaccines that are available to help prevent cancer and potentially eradicate cancer. Hepatitis B is it's a vaccination that all of our children get that can help prevent liver disease and eventually liver cancer. But HPV is another one, and I know there's a lot of talk right now, a lot of controversies around vaccinations, but HPV is a vaccination that can potentially eradicate cervical cancer down the road. It's now being used in children, and I think women can use it up to the age of 45, and I'll walk through that in a minute. But this is something that we'll still need to do our pap smears until we understand better how HPV prevents cervical cancer. So right now, it's sort of a two-arm effort to really prevent cervical cancer, which includes getting an HPV vaccine and getting your pap smears at a regular basis. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of healthy choices. So avoiding tobacco and secondhand smoke, knowing the resources to quit. I'll walk through these really briefly. Protecting your skin from the sun, limiting your alcohol intake, again, buzzkill at the bar, keeping a healthy weight and getting regular physical activity and avoiding inactivity. So I'm going to move through these pretty quickly. One of the things I've done here is included a lot of infographics. So I know a lot of you are working with patients and with individuals and getting the word out there around how to prevent and how to screen for cancer. And these infographics are available with quick Google searches. And so I encourage you to use them and to look in more detail if these are speaking to you about something that you need to do or somebody that you come in contact with, whether that's a close relative, a friend, or somebody you're working with out in the community around resources to help prevent cancer. And so the first is tobacco. So I think our goal is to eliminate tobacco use. And I've listed here on the left, and I know you can't see it very well, but just a quick reminder that tobacco causes more than just lung cancer. There are a lot of cancers that are associated with tobacco use. And there's also a lot of free resources to help people to quit at whatever stage they are in. To help them get ready to quit, to help them quit them when they're ready. And I've listed some of them here. Smokefree.gov has a lot of great free resources to help people quit smoking and to eliminate tobacco use. I think it's not right to not talk about tobacco use without just mentioning e-cigarettes. And again, a lot of information that is great that's available on these infographics. I've included a lot of them for the AACR. Up on the left, you can see that the symbol, and you can Google this to get these infographics. But I think some important things that I want us to remember about e-cigarettes is first of all, we don't really know what the impact of these are in terms of cancer. There's a lot of research that we need to do. This is, these are new devices in many ways, and they're gaining popularity. We don't know what the impact is going to be either on the heart or the lung or other parts of the body. And, I think that, e-cigarettes don't eliminate the use of tobacco. In fact, I've circled here, one Juul pod delivers as much nicotine as an entire pack of cigarettes. As well as other toxic substances. So while we might be avoiding some toxic substances, we're exposing ourselves to many others. And while they may also be aids to help people quit smoking who are smoking cigarettes, what we're finding in our youth is that it actually increases the probability that youth then go on to smoke cigarettes. And so I think there's a lot of reasons to use caution in this. I think it may be a good aid to help people quit smoking, but beyond that, it shouldn't just replace it. We need to continue our efforts to eliminate tobacco use. There's a lot of, discussions about weight and food and diet in terms of cancer, and a lot of things we don't know. But one of the things that we do know is that obesity is associated with many different cancers. And so I just charge you all to know your own body mass index. Okay, that's a combination of your weight and your height, and keep it at a healthy number for you. The magic number here is less than 30. Okay, but what's right for you now, and when you can get to 30, is a journey that you're on with your doctor and with your friends that can help you get to a healthy weight. And it's a discussion that you need to have with your doctor. But getting to a healthy weight can really help prevent cancers as well as many other diseases, including heart disease and diabetes, or to name a few. I'm sorry, I'm going to go through these again really quickly, just to give us some time to answer questions. But physical activity, also really important. I've included information about the physical activity guidelines across the lifespan, because a lot of us here are parents and we have children, and we need to understand that there's a lot of sedentary and inactivity in our lifestyles right now with COVID and in our bubbles. School-age children between the ages of 3 and 5 should be getting physical activity throughout the day, and caregivers should encourage active play throughout the day. Get them out off those video games and out in the backyard or down to the nearby park. For school-age children and adolescents, the recommendation right now is that they get at least an hour of physical activity, such as running, so aerobic activity, as well as bone and muscle strengthening, such as push-ups at least 3 times a week. And for adults, we really need to focus on avoiding inactivity and getting at least 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity activities, such as just going out for a brisk walk. Get a friend, grab a friend or a family member and get out there and get some aerobic activity. As well as moderate or intensive muscle strengthening in order to keep your bones strong, and at least 2 or more days a week. So you can look these up on your own. I'm sorry I have to go through these so quickly, but these are really, really important. And just think about the small steps that you can make to increase the physical activity in your lives and those of your loved ones. Okay, alcohol and cancer risk, again, the buzzkill at the bar. I just want us to be aware that alcohol actually, it doesn't just cause liver disease. It's associated with a lot of different cancer. For women, we need to be aware that we put our breasts at risk. We put our breasts at risk for cancer when we drink, even moderate to large amount of alcohol. And I know that with COVID, a lot of people have turned to that evening drink. And we're going to talk about all alcohol is important. And I'll cover that in a minute, but I just want to make people aware that alcohol is associated not only with breast cancer, but with liver cancer, with colon cancer, with stomach cancer, and with certain types of head and neck cancers. So what is a safe amount of alcohol? Probably none. But I think if you're going to drink, try to keep your limit to what we consider moderate drinking. So that's less than or equal to 1 drink a day for women who choose to drink, and less than 2 drinks per day for men. I showed you that figure of cancer risks in terms of alcohol intake. There is a lot of attention being paid to whether alcohol might increase the risk for prostate cancer. So stay tuned on that one. So it's not just women and their breasts and both women and men and their colon, it's also may increase the risk for prostate cancer. So keep your drinking, if you choose to drink, at least to moderate or below. And just remember that 1 drink, alcohol isn't just hard alcohol. It includes beer, it includes wine, it includes all kinds of spirits. And so there are some guidelines that you can look up on the web if you want around what is considered, 1 glass of wine, 1 glass of alcohol. Also be aware of heavy drinking and binge drinking behaviors, either in yourself or in your loved ones, and really encourage them to get help to reduce their alcohol intake. If nothing else for cancer, but also to lead a healthy life and to consider whether they may have addiction issues. Okay, skin cancer, we talk a lot about this, but skin cancer is one of the most common cancers. Once you've had 5 sunburns in your life, your lifetime risk for melanoma doubles. And so I think a lot of our efforts around skin cancer are really protecting ourselves from the sun, wearing sunscreen and protective clothing, and staying out of the sun during the highest sun hours between 10 and 4. Okay, sorry to move through this quickly, but I just want to talk a little bit about the HPV vaccine here. I've brought this up in the context of myth busting, because we're doing a lot of myth busting for vaccines in general. But just remember that, HPV is very common. Okay, this is a virus that we are exposed to that puts us at risk, not just for cervical cancer, but also for cancers in other parts of the pelvic region, such as the vulva and the vagina, as well as the anus, and then head and neck cancer. So as we get this vaccine out here, we're not just talking about preventing cervical cancer, but we're also preventing a lot of head and neck cancers and other rare cancers in other areas. And the HPV vaccine is very effective and can prevent most HPV-related cancers. HPV vaccine is not just for women, it's for women and men, is now FDA approved between the ages of 9 and 45. And while a lot of our efforts are in the pediatric population before people are exposed to HPV, you can get that HPV vaccine up to the age of 45. I think finally, just remember that, a lot of people say, well, I don't need that, or my kid doesn't need that because they're not sexually active. If you can get this on board, this vaccine on board before you're exposed to HPV, whenever that might happen, it can protect you for the rest of your life. And so it's an important thing to consider. So just a couple more slides here. What can we expect from routine cancer screening and prevention measures? Notice that the number 100% is not on this slide. Okay, so, nothing in medicine is 100%. We can make these efforts and this still may happen, but if we're undergoing our screening and we're adopting our healthy lifestyle, we really have a good chance at detecting it early and curing it and potentially preventing it. So I just encourage all of you, as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, some of the things that you can do, especially if you're already well screened, or to start that conversation around cancer for you and for others, okay? Ask your doctor when your screening test should be recommended. Share your family history, come up with an individualized or a personalized screening plan, and start that conversation with those that you love. And do it in a non-judgmental way. I care about you. I care about your health. Are you getting your cancer screening test? How can I help you do that? There's lots of ways to start those conversations and to do that in a non-judgmental fashion, and to meet people where they are and share your stories and see if that can motivate others to get their cancer screening. So I'm going to end this talk with just a quick reminder from the count from Sesame Street that it counts. Every little thing you do counts. Okay, so I just encourage you to think about one thing you can do in the cancer screening arena for yourself or for others, and one thing for cancer prevention that you can start and you can make a commitment to today. And I'm going to end us with a waterfall. So I'm going to ask you to commit to one thing that you're going to do as a result of this session. And I want you to type it in the chat right now while I'm continuing to sort of wrap this up. Start typing in the chat, but don't hit send. I'm going to give you a minute to type that in, and then I'm going to count to 3. And once I hit 3 and we all hit send, we're going to see a wonderful waterfall of ideas of things that we're going to commit to and things others are going to commit to that might give you ideas of things that you can do to help promote the message of cancer screening and prevention. So if you've had a minute to type in that chat, the thing that you are right now are ready to commit to or are going to do as a result of this session, I'm going to count to 3. And then I want you to hit send. 1, 2, 3. Great. Okay, I'm going to end this. I encourage you all to look at the chat, think about what you can do around cancer screening and prevention. And I want to thank the ChicagoCHEC staff for inviting me to talk today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ganshaw, for making this information accessible to us and for also attempting to simplify it, because I know cancer exists in a space that it feels like things are always changing, because they kind of are. If anyone, we don't have time for questions at this time, but if you do have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat and we will certainly get a reply to you later. With that said, we'll be moving into our next session, session 2. It is the ChicagoCHEC Cancer Research Projects. So I would like to invite Dr. Joseph Ben-Levy, the ChicagoCHEC Shared Project Investigator, and Dr. Susan Magacy, the Project Investigator for the ChicagoCHEC We Can Manage Project. Thank you so much.
You're muted, Dr. Ben-Levy.
Oh, okay. I'm unmuted now. Can you
Yes,
hear
we
me?
can hear you. Thank
Okay,
you.
cool. And I want to thank Dr. Ganshaw for her presentation and to share with her that she needs to investigate what we have done in terms of our citizen scientist activity and the activity of bringing in African-American men for clinical trials, and I think which has become a national model for that. We were very, very successful in our prostate cancer project and also in our colorectal project. And now we're working on lung cancer, which I'm going to talk about today. And I think that it's very, very important that we recognize that, the work that we have done in that regard. And also, I think one of the fundamental problems we've had is that we don't have enough people who look like me, who are in the profession, who can go out and work with people in this area to encourage them and show them the advantages of getting clinical trials. And I think that's been one of the fundamental errors, and this is why we use citizen scientists. So having said that, I want to talk about our project, the SHARE project, a novel approach to engaging African-American men to address lung cancer disparities. And we want to talk about some of the things we've done. We know that Black men are disproportionately impacted by lung cancer morbidity and mortality. And this is something both Dr. Ganshaw and Dr. Watson talked about. And the problem with the LDCT activity and studies in racially heterogeneous populations have found a correspondence between screening behaviors and factors such as physician activity, physical physician referrals, and the desire to reduce the uncertainty that exists with lung cancer. And but we don't know much about that. At least that's what they say. We don't know much about it. What are the problems between African Americans getting screened for lung cancer? And it's very simple. It's called medical mistrust, and which was something I intended to talk about until I found out I was supposed to talk about our project. But medical mistrust is fundamental to why it is that African Americans do not get screened for cancer. And that is a whole longitudinal issue that exists. Sometimes we like to look at a medical mistrust as something that's happened 1, 2, 3 generations. No, we got to go all the way back longitudinally. And in my initial presentation, I was going to go all the way back to 1611. because we really need to know how this thing has developed over time. Community engagement strategies are beneficial for understanding barriers to healthcare management. There's no question about that. We have to always engage the community. And one of the approaches that we use is a citizen scientist model. Citizen scientists are lay people who are trained in research methodologies, have proven value in increasing community knowledge, and of the importance of healthy behaviors such as screening, awareness, and so forth, building trust to deal with research, improving study designs and ethics, because in order for us to understand what the problems are, how do we improve the methodologies, we need to go and talk to the people whom we want to study, to ask them, what is it that they think that we need, that they need in order to help improve the health of their communities. And oftentimes what we do is look at them as third or fourth parties, and we're, you know, as if they're a bunch of lab rats, and we're studying them in their cages, rather than going out there and engaging with them and finding out what's going on. It takes certain type of people to do that. And what we found in our research in terms of the interventions is that we need to develop and establish social networks. And these social networks are grounded in community-based participation and community-based participants. And this approach allows us to engage in the attitudes, to engage in the behaviors, to engage in the beliefs of African-American men, to find out what are the issues related to lung cancer, and what things can we do to prevent it, because a lot of it has not to do not so much with stress as with distress, and that many of our communities have been distressed over a long period of time, and smoking is one of those things that helps to relieve some of that distress that they have been engaged in. So cancer screening and our model. You know, there are barriers to cancer screening that are well documented for Black men, you know, and whether these disparities represent prostate, colorectal, lung cancer, so forth. And again, that goes back to the whole idea of medical mistrust. To identify the known barriers of cancer screening in this population, which have a lot to do with, you know, fears of doctors being unable to provide the right types of questions. One of the things that we've decided in our group is we want to put together 5 questions that any person going to a physician would need to ask them so that they can get an understanding of what's going on within that 15-minute time frame that most people receive, so that we can hopefully get them to have a way of understanding what's going on with them, rather than having a whole lot of Greek and Latin based terminology thrown at them that they have no clue about. And so consequently, they get lost or are lost or intimidated by the fact that they're going before these doctors, some of whom have very disparaging views of Black people. Many of them coming from countries where they have systems in which people who are darker skinned are viewed as of a lower class or caste. And yet they're brought here to deal with some of the same people here and bring some of that same knowledge here, which is one of the reasons why I've argued for a very, very long time that I don't know of a single medical college in the United States or program that teaches any classes to future physicians about the history of African Americans in the United States, and that needs to be done. And I'm gonna keep on talking about that, and I'm gonna keep on advocating for it too. People who have the power to make that change happen in the curriculum, make it happen. And so until then, we're gonna still be playing around with all of these, you know, this beautiful language and stuff like that. But at least in our group and the work that we're doing in putting together our citizen scientist model, we have proven this to be a very valuable project in increasing the engagement, and at least in community engagement of African-American men in clinical trials. We have trained so far 8 citizen scientists, quite a few of whom have been my former students, who are very active people in the community, using the curriculum model from the University of Florida. These sessions covered healthcare and research, research ethics, medical mistrust, lung cancer 101, cancer disparities, and so forth. To be eligible for this, the citizen scientists had to be 30 years or older, self-identified as Black or African Americans, have a track record of engaging Black men, willing to undergo required training, and willingness to engage their social networks, peers, and eligible participants in the research project. And what we have found is that when you can come to these men in a way that they understand the importance of what this means to saving the lives of themselves and other Black men, it's easy for them to relate to. And sometimes you have to engage in a discourse with them that involves language that they understand. So our findings suggest that the citizen scientist training improved participants' knowledge, whether it's related to tumors and biopsies and early detection of mortality. And let me say, if something I didn't say at the outset, and that's that I am a cancer survivor. I got involved in ChicagoCHEC because I am a prostate cancer survivor. And I made a commitment after I was freed of cancer that I would do everything in my power to ensure that another African-American man does not die from prostate cancer or any cancer for that matter. And, and that's one of the reasons why I'm very much involved in this. I'm very passionate about it because nothing changes your mind and hits you deeper than when your doctor tells you you have cancer. All types of things are going through your head then. And one of the things you think about is death. I wish some of the people who are being resistant to taking the COVID vaccine could imagine things in that light. So participants also demonstrated a shift in their attitudes toward working with these various care organizations. They began to realize that, this is something that's really, really important, but I hadn't thought of it like that. Like I hadn't thought about being engaged in community health and public health and so forth until it hit me in my face. And sometimes we don't. And not that I didn't, think about health and being healthy and all that other kind of stuff I did, but some of these things like cancer are beyond your control. And so furthermore, participants increasingly agreed that their medical needs should come before other considerations in their healthcare settings. So what is the conclusion and next steps? Citizen scientists has demonstrated benefits for increasing engagement among Black men. Adaptive training shows benefits to increase XYZ, and reducing XYZ is critical for their role in outreach and education among potentially affected Black men based on their smoking histories, because we certainly are going to be looking at that. And I didn't have time in my other slide. I was going to go very deeply into the idea that of what the tobacco industry has done in the promotion of menthol cigarettes in the community, going back a while. It didn't just happen. We're talking about maybe 40 years, 50 years of constant advertising to the community and how they even shift the area of something like $5 billion that they're doing. So we will examine the CS approach to effect on the level of LDCT uptake in high risk of Black men, and estimate reductions in lung cancer mortality, particularly of Black men in the state of Illinois. And so that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So I thank you all very much. And I will end share now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Warnicki. I think we can go ahead and switch over to Dr. Magacy for the second part.
Hi, I'm Susan Magacy, and I am here representing the We Can Manage research project. This is one of the two projects within one of the two research projects within the ChicagoCHEC. I wanted to talk a little bit first. I love Dr. Ben Levy's passion and commitment to his community, and especially mentioning what drew him in to participating in the ChicagoCHEC and focusing on cancer health equity. I also came into ChicagoCHEC 6 years ago, I guess, with a passion and a commitment, but mine was to the disability community, who are identified as a health disparities group, but are often unrecognized in the cancer health equity research and treatment agenda. And just to give you some stats to show that it's not just me saying this, there was a recent study published in Health Affairs led by Lisa Izzoni out of Harvard. It was a survey of physicians from across the country, about 714 physicians. And it found that 82% of physicians believe that people with disabilities have a worse quality of life than their non-disabled peers. Only 40% of physicians felt very confident that they were able to provide the same quality of care to patients with disabilities as patients without disabilities. And only 56% said that they strongly agree that they welcome people with disabilities into their practice. So I want you to just take a minute to think about what those statistics might mean and how they might impact sort of quality of care and access to care across the cancer care continuum. And another thing that I think it's important to recognize is that people with disabilities are not some isolated separate group, but there are members of all of the diverse communities that you represent. So every health equity community or historically underserved community has people with disabilities nested within it. I also want to mention that our work is focusing on cancer survivors with known disabilities. So these could either be people who had pre-existing disabilities, like Linda Cassidy, who participated in the survivorship panel yesterday, but it could also be people who acquire a disability or a long-term impact as a result of their cancer and their treatment. So we know it is not a term that everyone embraces, but from our perspective, we feel, and this permeates all of our work, that disability represents a difference in how the body functions and how the mind functions, but difference doesn't necessarily mean deficit, and it doesn't mean bad. We also see acknowledging disability as a source of strength and not shame. And that kind of frames the work that we do and emphasizes why we really believe that our work resonates with the topic of this community forum, this idea of working together for better, the beginnings and new normal of cancer support and survivorship. Because as we celebrate every cancer survivor, we have to acknowledge the reality that about 40% of cancer survivors continue to experience long-term physical, cognitive, emotional, and sensory impacts of cancer in their treatment. And these often happen, or people start to recognize them once they are outside of the main cancer care and cancer treatment system. So lots of cancer survivors report that they don't feel that their cancer treatment teams adequately prepared them for these long-term effects. So while they feel blessed and grateful to have survived cancer, they aren't exactly sure how to deal with what comes next. So that is the group that we are targeting with our work. And I want to tell you a little bit about the project that was funded during the last cycle of CHEC and where it is leading us, and then hopefully leave a little bit of time for you to give us some feedback on how to move forward. So in the first cycle of ChicagoCHEC, we created We Can Connect, which was an app-based tool for cancer survivors with pre-existing disabilities. Because we heard that there was often a lack of of connection and community where people could talk about what it means to be a person with a disability living with cancer. So within We Can Connect, we designed in what we call 3 circles of support. One, the opportunity to connect with peers one-on-one for support and information sharing. We have community and forums built in there where people can go and engage around a topic that is interesting and important to them. We know sometimes it's hard to reach out for support, and even just, they call it lurking in the social media world, just being in that community and learning and reading from other people's posts can be a tremendous source of support. Then we also heard from community members that while they value peer support, they also value the specialized knowledge that comes from evidence-based research and resources. So we created a virtual library that has a number of evidence-based resources in there on a range of topics that people can access. So we designed this tool, and then we tested it with cancer survivors with disabilities. And they said, well, they like the tool. They also wanted more resources to help them figure out how to manage their cancer as sort of a long-term chronic condition. So that led us to develop or propose to develop We Can Manage, which is another mHealth tool designed as an intervention or a program that people can work through. So we started the process by talking to cancer survivors to understand their experience. So we spoke to lots of breast cancer survivors, head and neck cancer survivors, and sarcoma survivors to really understand the ways that cancer was continuing to affect their ability to do the things that they wanted to do and needed to do as part of their everyday life. And we pulled just a few representative quotations to emphasize sort of the scope and focus of the work. So one survivor said, the only thing worse than going through cancer treatment is after cancer treatment. So this sort of fall off after cancer treatment of what happens next. We heard people say, I'm still me, but I'm different. So it's sort of a positive spin on recognizing that there was difference and they needed to learn how to adapt to those differences. But there was also some shame and some self-blame among some cancer survivors, this idea that I feel like a slacker for not being able to move on. Or this was a young woman who had survived sarcoma and was just feeling like I'm not keeping up with like the other 20, 30-year-olds that I know in terms of where I am with my life, and it's frustrating. And then the last 2 quotes are more about this disability identification and whether people love the term or how they come to terms with some of the strategic benefits of identifying as a person with a disability, or at least taking advantage of some programs. So we use this information to help us design our self-management intervention. So the goal is to embed it within the We Can Connect tool through the magic of computer programming that we'll talk a little bit about. But it's going to have 4 kind of educational focuses. So the first one is appraisal support, and that's really this recognition that you are not alone, that you are part of this shared experience, and there are people who are figuring out how to integrate these long-term effects into their lives. There's a classic goal setting and action planning based self-management, what we call problem solving based self-management. There is a mindfulness component and practices, and then also a component that's going to focus on self-advocacy and also just a gentle introduction into some disability rights and civil rights protections that exist for people with disabilities. So our team, the science or researcher team, from academia is made up of psychologists, occupational therapists, computer scientists, and anthropologists. So we're pulling together some evidence-informed treatments and knowledge bases. Also borrowed a little bit and adapted the idea of the citizen scientists from Dr. Watson's and Ben Levy to create a team of survivor scientists. So this is a group of people with cancer survivors with known disabilities who are partnering with us throughout the entire course of the project to serve as co-designers and co-developers of the intervention. So they are working with us on designing the app. It's a picture here of some of the team members and some of those survivor scientists who are working with us. So we've done a series of design workshops that are led by our computer science partners, but really play off the knowledge of the survivor scientists. So to develop and create a shared understanding of the needs of the target population, we develop these personas. We've also done some activities to identify what people like and don't like in an app, to make sure that we're responsive to the community and not putting a lot of bells and whistles in there that people don't want or find annoying. I'm sure you've all used apps that have those annoying pop-ups and features. And then also thinking about what do they want that app to look like? What do they want the content to be? And then we're using those to develop what we call wireframes. So a sketch of what the app is going to look like. Again, lots of back and forth between the team, the survivor scientists, how to make the content well-targeted, relevant, and also engaging, so that people want to use the app, that we can put the best information in there. But if we don't create a user experience that invites people in and makes them feel heard and represented, we know that it's going to be of limited utility to the community. This slide just gives a little shout out to our amazing team who is working with us across this project. So we are really excited to be here and be in the community forum. We have a lot of work left to do in developing this app, but we really do want to hear feedback from the community about what would make a tool like this useful, relevant, and appealing, to members of the survivorship community. We know our survivor scientists are great, but there are only 5 or 6 people. So this is a good opportunity, and we'd love any feedback from you. So thank you, and I'll stop sharing my screen in just a minute as soon as I find the button. There we go.
Thank you so much, Dr. Magacy and Dr. Ben Levy, for such amazing presentations on the work that you guys have been working on. At this time, we do have about, looks like 10 minutes in our session. Does anybody in the audience have any questions or feedback to either Dr. Ben Levy or Dr. Magacy? Feel free to enter them in the chat or in the Q&A box, and one of our staff can go ahead and read them aloud.
Oh, by the way, Dr. Magacy, I can remember way back when we came into this together and we were talking, and so you saw my my little chat to you, right? I don't know if you saw it.
I haven't yet.
Okay, yeah, I'm a disabilities guy.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, I studied under some of the great ones. Of course, Terry Joe Smith and Marla Aravelis.
Oh, yeah.
Down in Alabama, and who else? But man, it's been so long since I've been with them. But great people. I mean, I got involved in this because I taught a lot of students with disabilities in all my classes. I didn't know anything about it. So when I decided to work with my doctor, I said, this is something else I'm going to study too. And it's cool, and I always admire the work that you do.
Yeah, well, obviously right back at you and your team. And I think I love that we rediscover this connection every year. at
Yes.
the community forum, and we just need to keep these conversations going throughout the rest of the year.
Absolutely.
Because I think
You know,
there's so
we need to have
many intersections between the work that we do.
exactly. In fact, we need to have
Yeah.
a, you know, and this may be kind of a joking thing, but I'm partly serious. We need to have a discussion between the disability folks and the spec ed folks. You understand, and talk about the distinction between medical versus social issues. You know what I mean? How we look at that. But anyway, that's another discussion we can have later on, Doc. Yeah, I just want to let you know how much I appreciate, you know, that work that you do, and because we fail to realize how, you know, like I tell students all the time, you live long enough, you're going to have a disability. Count on it.
Yep. Well, I think we have so many stereotypes about disability and who is a person with a disability. And, you know, we've been doing these qualitative interviews to get ready for building our app. And that's one of the things that we've heard is this, we ask people right out at the end of the interview, like, do you consider yourself to be a person with a disability? And, you know, even people who've been talking, you know, through, you know, with us for over an hour at that point about, you know, some of the physical changes they're experiencing or emotional changes, you know, there's still this tension of like, oh, I don't think that that's me, and that's some other group that's worse off, or that they somehow, some people felt like even diminished by hearing that under the definition in the Americans with Disabilities Act, as a cancer survivor, you are under that protection and therefore recognized as a person with a disability. And some people said that it actually made them feel angry when they heard that they were considered a person with a disability. But we think there's power in identification, and by not talking about certain aspects of your experience, it does create, you know, these issues of shame or kind of internalizing the experience in ways that it's not good. It's not good for someone's overall well-being, and it you know, it can also just make it tough to talk to your providers too if you feel sort of shame around the issues, or it's just something I should get over. So yeah, there's some value, whether you use the term disability or not. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Right before we get off, you know, one of the things that led to the ADA, you know, the Americans with Disability Act, that a lot of people don't talk about it, though, the history of is when the Black Panthers under Lomax and them, right, chained themselves to the up at the Capitol in Sacramento in California. And that really led to a lot of things. And people don't like to give, you know, the crazy things they think about the Black Panthers, they don't know the positive things that they did. And one of those things they did was assist in helping to produce the Americans with Disabilities Act. And,
I think the movie Crip Camp, that the documentary that just came out, did a really nice job of showing those intersections between the two social movements. Yeah, it was beautiful.
I got to write that down because I've been trying to think of the name of that movie I saw way back when I was in class. You know, Terry Joe Smith showed me too. So I said, what is the name of that? Crip Camp. There we go. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you both again so much, Dr. Benlevy and Dr. Magacy. We do have some people in the audience who would love to have the information that you guys provided today. So if you are able to and willing to share any information with us, we can follow up with everyone who is on the call today. Sure. And we do have a question for you, Dr. Magacy, from someone in the audience related to the app from your project. Okay. Are there any components in the app that are geared to caregivers of survivors?
Oh, that's such a great question. And we were talking about it within our team. One of the survivor scientists actually brought that up this week. So currently we're focusing on targeting survivors themselves. But as one of our survivor scientists kind of reminded us, you know, family and networks of support are so important in the lives of cancer survivors, and that making sure that we at least created a welcoming and open space where people can share the information. So although it's not directly targeted at caregivers, we are being challenged, and now challenged again by you. So thank you for the question, to figure out how to make it a welcoming space and how to acknowledge sort of the extended networks that people use in helping to manage their cancer. Very few people do this alone, whether it's, with families or friends, or, or just hearing throughout this seminar and through our interviews too, the value that people place on those survivorship organizations and the sense of community there. So yeah, I think we're going to have to think about some way to make it a welcoming and inclusive space for patients, not patients, for survivors and their care partners.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Magacy. If anyone has any other questions at this time, please feel free to comment in the Q&A or in the chat.
And there's another question from Erica Martinez. It says, are there any components in, I think this is the question that's been asked already, sorry. If Dr. Pamela Ganshaw is still here, there is one question that I did have, and it was about the age cutoffs that are created with regards to cancer screening. So for example, she had mentioned that for colorectal cancer, the age had been dropped from 50 to 45. And I was just curious about what are the deciding factors that go into like age cutoffs, especially in consideration of someone like the actor that recently passed away, the Black Panther actor. He was 43 when he passed away from colorectal cancer. So how do people navigate age restrictions even when they may be experiencing symptoms and have to fight to get screened?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So those are great questions and kind of complex. So I'm going to give it my best shot here. But I think, as it relates to the colorectal cancer screening cutoff and why that dropped is that, I think there was a lot of awareness and a lot of data showing that the incidence of colorectal cancer in younger individuals was increasing. And this is unlike a mammogram where breasts are really dense on a mammogram when you're really young. Colonoscopies, can work equally in young and in old individuals and older individuals. So I think that's part of what drove that. That kind of was part one of your question. The next question, around how do you work your way around some of these age intervals if you're having symptoms? So once you have symptoms, these tests are no longer screening tests. These are diagnostic tests. So if you're having symptoms of colon cancer at any age, you should be able to get a colonoscopy. And symptoms of colon cancer can be somewhat nonspecific. If you have blood in the stool, whether you're 45 or 25, you may get a colonoscopy if there's a suspicion that that is causing cancer. So I think it's really important to distinguish between a screening test and a diagnostic test. If you feel a breast lump or you have a breast symptom that's concerning for breast cancer, even though the screening age may start in your 40s or your 50s, you can still get a test like that to evaluate. That's a diagnostic test now at a much younger age. And then the other piece around like how to navigate that age interval if you don't even feel it's appropriate for you as a screening test can be somewhat driven by family history. And that's part of why I was talking about personalizing screening recommendations. So if you were the brother of that actor that died at 43 from colorectal cancer screening, your doctors would probably recommend that you have a colon cancer screening test at 33. So 5 to 10 years before the earliest onset of cancer in the family.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. At this point, we will take a 5-minute break. And if you think of any questions, please still feel free to put them in the chat. Like I said, we will be happy to get an answer to you. 5-minute break, so we'll see you back shortly. And if you or anyone you know is interested in joining the 2022 ChicagoCHEC Fellows cohort, please feel free to use the link on your screen to learn more. See you all soon. All right. We are all coming back now to go into our third session. At this point, we will be moving into session number 3. It is titled COVID-19 Vaccine and Cancer, and we would like to invite Dr. Susan Bleasdale to present.
Wonderful, thanks. Let me just pull up my slides here. There we go. Can you see my slides? Great. So I'm Susan Bleasdale. I'm the Chief Quality Officer at UI Health and Medical Director for Infection Prevention and Stewardship, and I am an infectious disease physician. And so really wanted to talk to the group about really the impact of COVID-19 related to cancer, of course. And so the topics, these are my disclosures, just I've been on clinical trials around some of the treatment for COVID-19. But really sort of where are we right now in the pandemic is what I'd like to cover. I'd like to talk about the impact on cancer and a little bit around the sequence of vaccine development and the implications for vaccination for those with cancer, and some commonly asked questions that I think may be helpful for those with cancer. So where are we now in this pandemic? And I think that's important to acknowledge is it's been over a year and a half now, and we have 225 million cases worldwide and 3 million deaths across the country. It's been over a year since we had our first case in the United States and within Illinois. We do have 3 vaccines that have gotten emergency use authorization, and one of those 3 that has gotten full FDA approval. There have been over 5,530,000,000 vaccine doses administered worldwide. This is really something phenomenal that's happened. We have treatment options when a year and a half ago, we had nothing to offer when someone was admitted with COVID, unfortunately. And unfortunately, though, despite all of these advancements, we have continued to see people dying from COVID-19. Where are we within the United States? This just is a snapshot from the CDC's COVID data tracker. And we have 42 million cases so far in the United States, and there have been over 680,000 deaths attributed to COVID-19. This is something that is staggering when initially we thought that this might be something like influenza, but in influenza, at the worst, we saw somewhere around a scale of 60,000 deaths a year. And this really, as many have heard in the media, now we're on the scale of the pandemic flu of 1918, just from the scale of the number of deaths that are attributed. 76% of adults have had at least 1 dose of vaccine. And then if we look down at the bottom right, 186 have been fully, 186.2 million people have been fully vaccinated, and 2.37 million have received an additional a dose since August. Right now, and this is a complex slide, but really what it shows is this orange part is the Delta variant. That's the variant that is predominant. It's over 99% of the cases in the United States right now. And this is the variant that is spread somewhat easier. It is something that is still responsive to vaccine, but also has significant implications. This is shows where we are again globally compared to other countries as well. The United States is the green line, as you can see right here. This was what happened last winter. Last winter, the number of cases really paled what we saw initially. So this is March and April when we first went into the pandemic, and it was, things were closed down, ICUs were full, but really we got much more into this over the last winter. And this is from October through until April. And as many know, we have seen this most recent surge, and this is related to the Delta variant. This is India right here that had seen the Delta variant, and things had gotten very significantly out of control with the number of cases. We have started to see a plateau, thankfully, in the United States, but that doesn't mean that we should stop doing what we're doing in precautions and moving towards vaccination, because that's really how we're going to flatten the next curve and hopefully not get to this scale or to this level with our next surge. And we anticipate we may see another surge as we get into the winter months. Even though we're seeing a plateau, this is a map from the CDC that shows high or substantial. So high is red and substantial is orange transmission rates across the country. And so really, most of us are seeing substantial or high level of transmission despite some plateauing. So really important that we need to keep working towards getting past this pandemic and getting control of it. The important thing I think also to highlight is that there are multiple conditions that put people at risk for complications, including hospitalization and death from the COVID-19 infection. And cancer is one of these. And then of course, if you add cancer and one of these other common conditions, that puts you at very high risk for severe complications from the infection. Cancer specifically and the risk. So cancer in itself puts people at risk. There is some thought that blood cancers may cause a higher risk than solid cancers because the immune cells of a blood cancer can be compromised. And so that you don't have the same sort of response that you can have despite having a cancer compared to someone that has a tumor or solid cancer. The treatments for cancer, of course, suppress your immune system and put you at high risk for complications as well. And so I think it's important that we know that cancer treatments, cancer itself puts people at risk for complications from the infection. And so if you put COVID-19 on top of cancer, this is a graph from the American Cancer Society that really highlighted that COVID surpassed our cancer deaths. So this is an average that cancer deaths are a large proportion of the deaths that we see in the United States. But during COVID-19, the COVID-19 related deaths surpassed our cancer deaths. And then on top of that is cancer and COVID-19. So this is really important that we understand that COVID-19 again has had a significant impact in putting people at risk for dying. The other impact I think that is important to highlight related to cancer is missed opportunities that have happened related to the pandemic. Because of the pandemic, especially early on, there had been decreases in diagnosis and screening treatments, screening testing. We've also had decreases in treatment because people were not getting into care. There also was temporarily some decrease in the clinical trials as well. And this is information, again, from the American Cancer Society, that there have been some studies that have shown the impact of the pandemic. In March and April, that first beginning of the pandemic, when things really shut down, it's estimated through electronic medical record review that there was an 80 to 90% decline in screening tests for breast cancer, colorectal cancer, and cervical cancers. By June, as things had leveled out somewhat, it was still somewhere, close to 30, almost 40% of pre-pandemic levels of where we should be in screening. In March and April of 2020, 60% of the clinical trials were halted for cancer because of concern about the pandemic and attention directed towards the pandemic as well. This is a nice graphic over from, again, the American Cancer Society, looking at the potential impact that the pandemic has had on cancer itself. So in the beginning of the pandemic, there was reduced access to care. There was fear from just the public in general around getting care because of the uncertainties of the pandemic. Resources were reallocated, people were laid off as things were shut down, and it really created a lot of reduced access. People were delayed in getting routine care, such as their preventative health visits, those screening tests that I talked about that went down significantly. And then if they had any symptoms of concern, there was some hesitation for people to seek care. And then of course, that's going to delay diagnosis and also delay treatment. There are some treatments that were delayed temporarily, postponed surgeries, some radiation and chemotherapy that were not as urgent in some sense. And so this is the potentials for increasing the risk related to cancer. And these are some of the projections that were put out earlier this year last year in 2020 related to these potential decreases, specifically for colorectal and breast cancer, that there may be excess deaths related to this. So it's really important for people to know and understand that it is safe to get care. And yes, there was a lot of uncertainty in the very beginning of the pandemic, but Right now, we have had processes and procedures in place since April of 2020 so that people can get care safely. You're screened in all healthcare settings for COVID-19 symptoms. There's universal masking of staff and patients, even as we had been back and forth in the public around masking if you were vaccinated or not vaccinated. In healthcare settings, you are masked if you are a patient, and you are masked as a provider as well. Hand washing, of course, is really important. Our distancing measures, and then, of course, vaccination offering to our patients, but also vaccination of our healthcare workers. And many institutions have required vaccination as a condition of employment for their healthcare staff. And then, of course, in the state of Illinois, that's been recommended. And also nationally, that's been recommended as well, that healthcare personnel are vaccinated again to make sure that we have a safe environment for people to get care, for screening, for treatment, for all the needs that you have. And these are things in general for all of us, not just seeking care, but in our lives. We know that there are things that help to protect us from the pandemic. And these are measures of masking, washing our hands, and keeping our distance. And so those are important for you as you're seeking care, but also for you in your personal life to make sure that you're choosing wisely when you're taking down your mask and who you are around so that you can make sure that you're protected. And then, of course, vaccination is still very important for prevention in this pandemic, especially for our patients with cancer. There's a lot of questions around the vaccine, and that's why I think it's important to go through the sequence of how we got to this so quickly in a year and a half of having vaccines offered and available, and really to understand how did this happen so fast. This was fast, but it was done very controlled. We did not skip any measures of safety or efficacy or how well the vaccine works. And it's important to know that, as I mentioned, there were many trials that were put on hold. And so a lot of attention and resources were directed towards vaccine development. We've had advances in science that have allowed us to be able to do things very quickly. Because of something called whole gene sequencing, the scientists were able to map out the genetic sequence of what we call the SARS-CoV virus. That is the virus that causes COVID-19. They were able to map that by January of 2020. So December of 2019, the syndrome of COVID-19 was named because it was in 2019. But by January, they were able to map it out, and that helped to start the vaccine trials and development. They used platforms that had been used for other things before, and so we had that mechanisms in place to be able to manufacture and produce these vaccines and do these trials quickly. We also, as many of you who have had cancer and participated in clinical trials, there were many people that were willing to participate in the clinical trials. And we had hundreds of thousands of people that participated in the clinical trials to help us to get data very quickly around safety and efficacy. So this is a little bit around some of the trials around the vaccine candidates. Now, the Moderna vaccine, the Janssen or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and the Pfizer vaccine are the ones that are available in the United States. And then these are other vaccines that have been available internationally. And you can see that things started in July of last year, and we were able to enroll very quickly and be able to look at these outcomes very quickly. And so this is a highlight of some of the information around each of the current vaccine candidates available in the United States. So Moderna, which is a messenger RNA vaccine, that's the mRNA, had 30,000 participants initially. And they found that in those that were vaccinated, they only had 11 cases of infection. And that showed that it was very highly effective. That's the efficacy number. And they also looked at severe disease, that there was none that were developing that severe disease in the vaccinated groups. That's really 100% efficacy from that standpoint of hospitalization and death. And then they looked, and this is really important, they looked across age, race, ethnicity, and gender to make sure that we had really looked at that this is going to be effective across all demographics. The Pfizer is also a messenger RNA vaccine. They had 43,000 participants, and they had 95% efficacy at day 28. Only 8 people developed infection in the vaccinated group. They looked at severe infection, but severe infection was actually not hospitalization, it was just severe symptoms. So they did have one instance of severe infection, but they actually had no hospitalizations in the clinical trial. So that was really important to know. And again, that was looked at across all of the demographics. The Janssen vaccine, also called the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, it uses what we call a human adenovirus vector, similar to some other vaccines that we have available. This one is a single dose. They had 34,000 people enrolled worldwide. It showed lower efficacy in the clinical trials, but it was done in a different time period that I think might have had somewhat to do with that. We really have seen that it is somewhat higher efficacy than seen in this clinical trial, but it did have 85% efficacy against that moderate to severe disease and in an outpatient. There were no hospitalizations or deaths seen in the clinical trials. And this is where I highlight where we did the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is as we got to this was in the middle of that last winter surge. And that may be why the Johnson & Johnson vaccine looked like it was less effective because we were hitting into that other surge. But it's important to know that with that vaccine, there were no hospitalizations. And so that's really important, that it's probably more effective actually than is reflected in that clinical trial. Again, just to let you know, where are the vaccines approved right now? So Pfizer, which has full FDA approval, is approved for age 12 and up. It's 2 doses, it's 21 days apart. The Moderna vaccine is approved for 18 and up. It's also 2 doses, but 28 days apart. And the Janssen or Johnson & Johnson vaccine is approved for 18 and up, and it's just a single dose right now. So there's a couple of questions that I think are important, especially for our patients with cancer. Can the vaccine give me COVID-19? And this is something that's asked by a lot of people, but as patients that have cancer, you may be aware that there are certain vaccines that we don't give to cancer patients. And it's really those that have live viruses, because if your immune system is compromised, oftentimes we may not recommend you to get a particular vaccine because it might put you at risk for getting an infection because of the live virus. None of the vaccine candidates use a live virus. And so that's important. So this is something that is safe for our compromised patients. And you would never ever test positive for having an active infection if you were to receive the vaccine. You might have an antibody test that's positive if you got the vaccine, but it depends on the type of antibody test. Some antibody tests will only show natural immunity, and some antibody tests will only will show both vaccine immunity and natural immunity. But you cannot get COVID-19 from getting the vaccine. A lot of people ask, should I check to see if I have antibodies before I get vaccinated? And I would say no, because regardless of your antibody status, it's still recommended that you get vaccinated. And again, like I mentioned, only some antibody tests can detect antibodies to the vaccine as well as natural immunity. In particular, it's related to the spike protein in the antibody. But then many ask, well, shouldn't I check my antibodies? Because what if I had already had COVID-19? Should I still get vaccinated? And I would say, yes, it's safe, first of all, to get vaccinated, even if you've had the infection before. And there's data that show that it's likely more efficacious for you to get vaccinated as well. And there's a study that looked at people that had COVID-19 before and looked at those that got vaccinated and in addition to having had it before and those that didn't. And you were more protected with the addition of vaccine, even if you had had it before. And this is really important for our cancer patients because your immune system may not be able to respond as strongly to either vaccination or natural immunity. And so you need to have as much as possible to benefit and protect you to make sure that you can be protected. Will the vaccines protect against the variant strain? As I mentioned, we are currently in the Delta variant with 99% of our cases here, but we do have information that the vaccines that are available are protective against the Alpha variant, which was the first one that became predominant, which was the one that started in the UK, many have heard, and effective against the Delta variant. And that it is maybe more easily spread, so we're seeing more cases, but we are not seeing those cases account for hospitalization. So this graph shows, this is the surge that we've seen right now of the unvaccinated people that are being hospitalized. So this is looking at hospitalizations. And yes, there are some people that are vaccinated that do end up being hospitalized, but you can see the scale is much, much smaller. And it tends to be those that are compromised that don't have full protection from the vaccine. But really, it is important that the vaccines are effective against current variants that are available. It's important to know the symptoms that you get. As I mentioned, you cannot get COVID-19 from the vaccine, but like all medicines and vaccines, they cause some, we'll call them side effects. But really, these are some things that we expect to happen because as you get vaccinated, it's your immune system mounting a response, developing a strategy to getting the vaccine so that when you are exposed to the active live virus, you have a strategy to fight it off. So you get a vaccine. Many times people have pain at the injection site. That can happen when you get your flu shot as well. Sometimes a little bit of redness there. With this, you may have fever even sometimes. And really, it's mostly after in a 2-dose series, after you get that second dose. Sometimes people have chills. They might feel tired. They might have some nausea, some headaches, some muscle aches and pains, even some joint pains. And sometimes in very few, 1 to 5%, we've seen in the arm where you got the vaccine, there can be some swelling in the glands or the lymph nodes under your arm. These again are, these are side effects that you can expect. And really, the thing that I like to highlight is this is because these vaccines are so highly effective. Your body is really developing the strategy to fight off the live virus. And that's why these things are somewhat not unexpected to happen after you get the vaccination. And they get better. So this lasts 1 to 2 days. And many people ask, well, I don't want to feel bad after getting the vaccine. It's important to highlight 1 to 2 days, these symptoms resolve. And then when you get exposed to the virus, you're going to be able to protect yourself. It's important to know that you will be able to, you'll be able to protect yourself. This will resolve. And then you will be, it'll prevent you from being in the hospital. And this can be related to, I apologize, I'm getting an urgent call here. You will be protected and keep you from hospitalization. Let me let them know. On my lecture right now. Apologize. Okay, next slide. And this, so as I mentioned, the lymph node swelling. So important for cancer screening when you're getting your mammogram. You may have some advice from your physician that you should plan your mammogram around your vaccine dose. And so really we advise, because if you have that lymph node swelling, that may be a little bit confusing for your mammogram. So it's really recommended to get your mammogram done before you get your first dose or 4 weeks after you get your second dose because of that lymph node swelling that you can have underneath. This is really important right now for those that have not been vaccinated is, can I get my flu shot and my COVID-19 vaccine at the same time? Because we are getting ready as we have flu vaccine available to now give you the flu vaccine. Yes, you can get other vaccines at the same time as the COVID-19 vaccine. And it's really important right now that you get your flu shots as we want to be ready. We didn't have flu last year, but we don't know what it's going to look like this next year. So it's really important to make sure you get your flu vaccine. So yes, you can get both at the same time. We didn't know that early on. And so there was a recommendation to wait, but that has changed. You can get any other vaccine at the same time. Do you still need to wear a mask? Right now, yes, you do for now. And it's really because none of our vaccines are 100% effective. We have high prevalence or a lot of the Delta variant around. And that if you're vaccinated, it's going to decrease the likelihood that you're going to get it by somewhere around 5-fold, but you could still get it and you can still spread it. Less so again while you're vaccinated. And it's important, especially for our cancer patients, to have extra protection. And so really we want to make sure you're protected. We also want to be protected right now against our next variant strain. Some have heard about the mu variant. We really want to be protected before the mu variant becomes prevalent in the United States. It's been around since January of this year. We don't have it as a predominant strain in the United States, but we want to make sure that we're still protected to get past, hopefully, another surge of a different variant. There's a lot of questions, I think, around potential other side effects related to the vaccines, especially as it relates to cancer. So there have been an association with a blood clotting disorder associated with the Janssen or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. This is a rare autoimmune triggered condition that causes the body to react to the platelets that help you to clot. This can happen rarely from other things like medications Actually, infections is the most common cause of this to happen. And it tends to be maybe in people that might have a genetic predisposition. There's currently some data that there were 6 cases out of 6.8 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that were delivered. They found no association with Moderna or Pfizer. There's ongoing review, of course. Many have probably heard they halted the Johnson & Johnson vaccine administration briefly while they reviewed this data, but they felt that there may be some association that's hard to tell if it's beyond the normal risk within the public. And so it's a decision that you make related to your physician, especially with cancer, if you are at higher risk for clotting, if the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is right for you. I would also highlight that COVID-19 infection causes a significant risk for clotting. And so it's important to understand that the risk of the vaccine is very low and the risk of the infection and clotting disorder is very high. And so even despite that, your physician still may recommend the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for you, dependent on your unique circumstances. There also has been some heart inflammation seen with the messenger RNA or the mRNA vaccines. There was a signal of this, in particular in male, young adults, and teens, often after they got 2 doses. This really had resolved with rest without requirement for hospitalization. Again, this is something to highlight. There is some increased potential risk that has been associated with that vaccine, but there is also a significant risk related to the infection itself that causes, again, that heart inflammation. It's called myocarditis and can even cause frank heart failure in people from the infection, not the vaccine, but from the infection. And so this is why the CDC has continued to recommend the messenger RNA vaccine for all those age 12 and up, because they feel that small risk does not outweigh the high risk relative to infection. And so, as I mentioned, this is important about that you can maybe still get the vaccine, like I mentioned earlier, but it's still really important about, why should I get vaccinated if there's still a chance I can get COVID? Because all 3 of these vaccines are very highly effective in the trials in preventing hospitalization and death and these severe complications like clotting and heart failure, like I mentioned. So how long does the vaccine last in your system? It really briefly remains there for your immune system to develop and fight off and develop the strategy so that when you get exposed to the live virus, you know how to do it. Your immune system then has this memory to fight the virus. We actually don't know how long this memory will last, but there's some data that has suggested that you may have long-term immunity. There's some vaccines that we have that have this long-term protection, like hepatitis vaccines. You get those and really you have long-term protection. Meningitis. There are some vaccines that have the protection that wanes over time and you need boosters, like tetanus, pertussis, which is whooping cough, or varicella, which is the chickenpox vaccine. So then the question is, well, I need a booster. This has been a hot question in the last week and actually in the last 24 hours. Currently, like I mentioned earlier, the vaccines that are available are very effective against the primary strain, which started in Wuhan, and the Alpha and the Delta variant strain. We may need to get some sort of booster to protect against some of these other variants as it changed. Within the last week, there has been a review by the FDA and the ACIP, which is a division of CDC. It's called the Advisory Council on Immunization Practice. And so in the last week, there's been a lot of information. And just within the last 12 hours, CDC has put forth recommendations, which I'll go over in a minute. But I would say that the additional doses has been reviewed at different points. In August, the FDA and the ACIP looked at boosting or giving an additional vaccine dose for immune compromised people. And in particular, people with cancer, people that have gotten an organ transplant or are getting immunosuppressive therapies. And so you can see that for those that have had cancer, there is some people that have not mounted a significant response. Those that have had an organ transplant or those that are getting these immune suppressive therapies that are not likely fully protected by the 2 doses of the messenger RNA vaccines. So they did recommend that for those that are immune compromised or getting these suppressive therapies, that you get a 3rd dose. And so that's already been recommended. They couldn't comment on Johnson & Johnson, but Johnson & Johnson has some information that has come out within the last week as well. And they have a trial that showed that giving an additional dose of vaccine after 56 days showed an increase in the antibody response, and it was good and durable as well. However, they're not sure still that we need this additional dose for Johnson & Johnson based on the information that we have of how well it's still protecting against hospitalization and death at 8 months right now. So this is something that we may hear more about Johnson & Johnson, because there's a lot of questions for people that have already gotten this vaccine. Do I need a booster? We don't know yet, but there is information that may come out shortly. The thing I want to remind everyone about is some information about that comes out. We have to wait until it's been thoroughly reviewed. So now I want to go over what has been reviewed in the last 24 hours. As I mentioned, in August, they recommended for immune compromised individuals that had gotten Pfizer or Moderna, which are the messenger RNAs, that you get a third dose. And the third dose can happen any point after a month after you finish the series. And who are those individuals? It's those that have cancer, are getting cancer treatments, have had a transplant of either their blood or an organ, are receiving medications that suppress their immune system. So these are people that are getting cancer treatments, but also people that are getting immunosuppressivation agents that maybe have things like rheumatoid arthritis or other autoimmune diseases. And then of course, those with HIV, in particular, those with AIDS, that their immune system is very low, and the marker for that low immune system is having what we call a CD4 count less than 200. So the recommendations that came out in the last week are, I think, important. They looked at people that got a third dose. They looked at about 325 patients that got an additional dose, and they did not show any increased risk in these immune responses that I mentioned, that myocarditis or the clotting disorder. So I think that was important. And then they did recommend for those over 65 and older to get a booster of Pfizer. And this is really just related to Pfizer that they looked at this data. And for those that are 50 to 64, they recommended if you have underlying medical conditions, like I listed in the beginning, that put you at risk for complications from the infection, which includes cancer, you should get a third dose of the Pfizer vaccine after 6 months. They also recommended those 18 to 49, if they have other underlying medical conditions, you should consider it. The ACIP did not recommend those with occupational risk, but CDC actually did say in the last 24 hours that they recommend for those that have a high occupational risk, and that may be healthcare workers or teachers, that they would recommend getting a third dose. And that is where things ended out in the end. The other thing I think that is important to mention is we're talking about, how can you be fully protected? Do you need a third dose? Are you going to be fully protected when you get that third dose if you are compromised, if you do have cancer? And so as an extra measure of protection, this is something that has always been recommended for family, close friends, caretakers of those with cancer to be protected further, not just from COVID-19, but from other vaccine preventable diseases, is that all of those individuals around you should get vaccinated, because if they have a stronger immune system, they'll be able to kind of cocoon and protect you as well. So it's really important for those around you to make sure that they're up to date with their vaccinations, not just for COVID-19, but other vaccine preventable diseases as well. This is, I think, also important, as it's probably very confusing as we've been going through this pandemic. There's a lot of information out there. Things change on a day-by-day basis. Sometimes information gets out into the media based on what we call preprint, pre-reviewed data. Normally, when we do trials and research, we do it very rigorously. It has to go through multiple steps, and it goes through all of these steps. And as I mentioned, as the vaccines were approved for emergency use authorization, they went through all of these steps. It went through the clinical trial, it went through the safety review, it went through what we call peer review, where other scientists look at that data to make sure there isn't any errors, there isn't any bias. And that's how we came to the final recommendations of these are safe to use. And so I think it's important to understand that may be why you hear some confusing information, because sometimes there's very encouraging data, encouraging information that gets out, and people are anxious to be able to use this. But we want to make sure that we're always looking at things very carefully, very rigorously, very transparently so that we are making decisions so we can ensure safety for all and ensure high efficacy and really protection for everyone. And so this is why it's really important when you're hearing this information in the media, make sure that you are relying on reliable sources for information. Talk to your doctor about what is best for you. That's really important to make sure that you're talking to your doctor. They're looking at this information, they're interpreting it, they're following the best guidance, they're using reputable sources to be able to make recommendations. So it's really important. Talk to your doctor about what's best for you, how to protect you, and how to make sure that you're getting what you need through this pandemic. This I just want to highlight at UI Health, we have vaccine available. We have a site, vaccine.uihealth.care, and you can go to our site, you can go to any other vaccine finder to be able to get your vaccine if you do qualify for an additional third dose, a booster dose, or you haven't started to get vaccinated. Make sure that you do get vaccinated and get protected, or if you need your family and friends to get vaccinated, that they get vaccinated. The other thing I wanted to highlight is that there, beyond vaccination, if unfortunately you do acquire the COVID-19 infection, there are treatments. We have treatments within the hospital, but we have outpatient treatments too. There's things called monoclonal antibodies. And these are things for people that are at risk for complications from the infection. There are some people that are young and healthy that have COVID-19 that get a mild infection. There are many that are at risk for these complications. And so we have these treatments called monoclonal antibodies that help to prevent the need for oxygen, the need for hospitalization. These are infusions, and all medical centers have them available. And so it's important to know that they're there, and talk to your doctor if you do have COVID-19, if you need to be treated with a monoclonal antibody to help to prevent your hospitalization. The other thing, as I mentioned, there were so many people that participated in the trials for the vaccination. And I think many within the cancer world have participated in some clinical trials as well, because that helps to advance the opportunities for your care, but also advance opportunities for other patients in being part of this. There is a trial just looking at the outcomes of cancer patients who have gotten COVID-19. This is on the American Cancer Society webpage. And so it's just important to know that if unfortunately you have had COVID-19 and been infected, there are trials that are available through the National Cancer Institute as well. And I think that is all I have for my slides. So then I'll stop if there are questions for me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bleasdale. We actually do have a question that someone submitted in Spanish, so I'll go ahead and translate it for you. So when you mentioned the third dose of the vaccine with people who have cancer, are you referring to those people who are currently in treatment?
Yes, those that are currently in cancer treatment do meet the criteria for getting a third dose. Those that have had cancer are at higher risk and would meet the criteria for getting a third dose. And so it's important to talk with your doctor about whether or not you meet those criteria for getting a third dose right now or a 6-month dose.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bleasdale, for arming us with facts and for sharing this information in a safe space that people trust. And we can all make informed decisions moving forward and hopefully share what we learn with those other people in our own personal community. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
With that said, we would like to announce our raffle winner for today's event. Drum roll. The winner is Luz Gomez. So Luz, you will receive an email from someone from the CHEC staff. We will reach out to you and be sure to get you your prize. Now, on Monday, everyone that came to our forum will receive an email with a link to a survey. We ask that you please take the time to fill out that survey. It helps us make improvements for next year and positively affect change in people's lives. So please do take the time to fill that out if you can. We will be sharing all forum materials and recordings to the forums as well to everyone, so keep a lookout for that. And if you are interested in attending our next virtual community conversation, it will be on October 27th. The theme will be cervical cancer and returning to routine gynecological care. The link is on your screen if you're interested in registering there. Oh, I did forget one thing. If you fill out the survey on Monday, you will also be entered to win a raffle. We will be giving out 4 prizes, so your chances are really good. Four people will win from filling out that survey as well. Just a little incentive. At this time, I would like to pass it over to Alicia. She will be giving our closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. I did want to just give a warm thank you to everybody that took time out of their busy schedules today to join us. And as well as if you joined us yesterday, we're very grateful for that. I also wanted to give thanks to all of our wonderful speakers that made such great presentations both today and yesterday. We really couldn't have done this without all the great information that you were able to share with us today. In addition, I did want to give a special thank you to our planning committee that includes our community steering committee members, as well as some of us on the outreach core. We really could not have done it without all of the hard work and the multiple meetings that we've done. So a special thank you to Lisa Tussing Humphreys and Janine Natahirageza from our outreach core, and then as well as Laura Jane Hyde from Gilda's Club, Esther Samarella from Chicago Hispanic Health Coalition, Patricia Canessa from Northwestern, Rosemarie Rogers, one of our community advocates, Lisa Colavenu from Wellness House, and Joanne Glenn from the Watt Foundation, as well as our CSE co-chair. Thank you again to everybody, as well as the CHEC staff, for helping us put on such a wonderful event. We really could not have done any of this without our wonderful attendees. So all of you were very instrumental in helping us put on such a great event. I could say thank you all day long, but I do want to give you time back in your day. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening. I hope you enjoyed our program these past 2 days.